I watched my wife agree, out loud, in front of my own parents, that everyone in our house would be better off if I just vanished. I'm Travis, 39, married to Diane for 3.5 years, together almost 5. She came with a daughter, Leah, who was 13 when we met and is 17 now. I've got my own kid, Nina, 15, from my first marriage to a woman named Serena. Nina lives with Serena most weeks and stays with me every other weekend and half the summer. I'm putting that out front because it matters for how the rest of this lands. Leah's biological father is a guy named Hank, 2 states over, remarried, running a second household he seems a lot more invested in than the first. He covers what the court tells him to cover and sends a card most birthdays. Beyond that, he's not really in the picture, hasn't been since before I came along. I never tried to replace him, never told Leah to call me dad, never corrected her when she introduced me to people as her mom's husband instead of anything closer. I just showed up. Every basketball game, even the ones where she rode the bench the entire second half. I'm the one who taught her to drive, 2 blocks from the house in the empty lot behind the church, because Diane said the whole thing made her too nervous to do it herself. I'm the one paying her car insurance because Diane's credit got wrecked years before I met her, and adding a teenage girl to her own policy would have cost more than our budget could absorb. I'm the one who put Leah's phone on my family plan back when it was supposed to be a temporary fix and just never came off it. I'm not saying any of that to make myself sound like a saint. I'm saying it because, by the end of this story, somebody needs to understand exactly what was sitting on my side of the ledger, because everyone in that house acted like none of it had ever happened. The house itself is mine. Bought it 6 years ago, 2 years before Diane and I even met, back when I was still putting my life back together after the divorce. 3 bedrooms, a detached garage I converted into a half-finished workshop I never have time to use, a backyard that backs up to a drainage ditch instead of a fence, which means every spring I'm out there clearing brush so it doesn't flood the basement. Small stuff, but it's the stuff that actually runs a household, and for 5 years I ran it without much complaint. The fight that ended things happened over Memorial Day weekend, at the cookout my parents drive up for every year. Leonard and Pamela, my mom and dad, have been coming up for this thing since before Diane, back when it was just me and Nina and whoever I happened to be seeing. It's tradition at this point. Folding tables in the yard, my dad insisting on running the grill even though my mom thinks he leaves everything on too long. The same playlist every year because nobody's bothered to update it. Leah wanted to go to a party that night with her boyfriend, a kid named Trace, who I have genuinely never seen without a phone in his hand, not once, not even at dinner. I told her no. She was failing 2 classes with 3 weeks left in the semester, and the week before I'd laid it out plainly. Grades come back up before the social calendar opens back up. Diane had agreed with me on that Tuesday, sitting at the kitchen table going through Leah's grade portal with me. By Saturday, she didn't agree with me anymore, and she didn't tell me that ahead of time. I found out in front of everyone. It started over hot dogs. Leah made a comment about how I wasn't even her real father, so I didn't get a say in what she did with her own life. Normally, I'd let something like that roll off because she says things like that when she's mad and usually walks them back an hour later. This time was different because Diane was standing right there with a pair of tongs in her hand, and when I looked over expecting her to shut it down the way she usually does, she didn't say anything. She had this look on her face like she'd been waiting for someone else to say it first so she wouldn't have to. Leah kept going. She said I acted like I ran the whole house just because I paid for things in it, and that honestly everyone would probably be better off if I just disappeared. Diane said it too. She didn't say it quiet. My dad was 20 feet away at the grill, my mom was standing next to me with a bag of chips in her hand, and Diane looked right at me and said, we'd all be better off without me there, that I made everything tense, that I never let anything go. Nobody walked it back. Not Leah. Not Diane. My own father stood there at the grill with the spatula in his hand and didn't say a single word either, which honestly sat with me worse than almost anything else that happened that day. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything, even though some part of me wanted to. I set my paper plate down on the picnic table, walked into the house, and started packing a bag. Diane followed me in about 2 minutes later, asking what exactly I thought I was doing, like the answer wasn't sitting right there in the open. I told her I heard her the first time, and I wasn't going to make her say it twice for my benefit. She tried to walk it back then, said she didn't mean it the way it sounded, that Leah's grades had her stressed and it just came out. I told her I didn't really care how she meant it because I knew what she'd said, and so did my parents standing 20 feet from a grill that was still running with nobody watching it. I grabbed clothes, my razor, my laptop, and the folder I keep with Nina's custody paperwork in it, because that folder was not staying behind in that house for anyone to go through. I went out through the garage so I wouldn't have to walk back past the cookout to get to my truck. My sister Carla lives about 20 minutes away. She's the one I called, sitting in my driveway in flip-flops with the engine running before I'd even backed out. She didn't ask a single question, just told me the spare room had clean sheets already on it, that her husband Stuart had been using it as an office and she'd cleared it out back in the spring for no particular reason she could explain at the time. I didn't think much of that detail then. I think about it more now. I want to be clear about something. I didn't leave to make a point. I left because I'd spent 4 years hearing some version of "you're not really her dad" and telling myself it didn't matter. And standing in that yard hearing my own wife agree out loud that the whole house would be better without me was the first time I actually let myself believe the math wasn't working in my favor anymore. So I stopped doing the math for them right there on the spot. That night, on Carla's pull-out couch, listening to Stuart's dog scratching at the door, I didn't do anything dramatic. I just sat there with my phone, going through accounts. Not to be petty about it, just trying to understand what was actually mine, and what I'd just been quietly carrying because nobody had ever asked me not to. Leah's car insurance, under my policy. Leah's phone line, on my family plan. The mortgage on a house that's only ever had my name on the deed. I didn't touch a single one of those things that night. I want that on the record clearly because what happened next is going to sound like I moved fast, and I didn't. I sat there a long time with the auto-pay screen open on my phone, thinking about tongs in Diane's hand and the look on her face right before she said it, and I went to sleep without changing anything. The next morning was when my phone started going off. Diane first, 3 times back-to-back before 8 a.m. Then Leah, twice. Then a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be Leah's school calling, about something completely unrelated to any of this, which just happened to land in the worst possible window and make the whole pile of missed calls look even more chaotic than it already was. I sat out on Carla's back step with a cup of coffee Stuart had made me, watching the numbers stack up on the screen. 8, then 10, then 13 by the time I finally looked up from it. And I didn't answer a single one. Carla came out and stood in the doorway behind me, asked if I was planning on picking that up at some point. I told her not yet. She asked what exactly I'd done. I told her I hadn't done anything. I told her all I'd done was stop, and apparently that alone was enough to set the whole house off. I hadn't even gotten to the part that actually mattered yet. Update. A lot of people asked what I actually did that made the phone explode like that, so let me walk through it in order, because the sequence matters more than the headline. First call I made was to the insurance company, mostly because that was the bill due soonest, and I genuinely didn't know if I was even allowed to keep covering a car I no longer lived under the same roof as. The guy on the phone, somebody named Kellen, who I'd dealt with a handful of times over the years, setting up policies, told me removing a driver took about 10 minutes and could take effect same day. I sat at Carla's kitchen table with Stuart's coffee going cold in front of me and told him to go ahead and do it. The phone line I almost left alone. That one felt different, pettier somehow, because a kid without a phone in this day and age might as well not exist socially, and I knew that. But I kept thinking about every ride I'd given her to practice, every late slice of pizza I'd bought her and her friends after a game, every time I told Diane not to worry about that bill because I had it handled, and then I kept thinking about Leah looking right at me over a paper plate of hot dogs telling me to disappear, like none of that had ever happened. So I called and pulled her off the family plan too. Took about as long as the insurance did. The mortgage I left exactly as it was. I wasn't about to throw a 17-year-old and her mother out of a house with zero warning over a weekend, whatever else was going on between us. What I did do, sitting there at that kitchen table, was log into the joint account Diane and I kept for groceries and household stuff, and the general kid expenses. I wanted to see what had actually been moving through it the last few months, because money had felt tight all spring in a way that never made sense, given what we both brought in. That's when I found the transfers. 8 of them since the previous fall, $300 to $400 at a time, going out through an app to an account under the name Mason D. Mason is Diane's younger brother, the one who got laid off from his job back around October, and has been bouncing between a friend's couch and our own spare room every few weeks since. The kind of situation my mother-in-law refers to as him going through a rough patch, like it's weather, and not something that's been going on for the better part of a year. Diane never once mentioned sending him money. We'd had actual arguments that spring about whether we could afford new tires for her car. The entire time, she'd been quietly wiring her brother somewhere close to $3,000 out of an account I thought we managed together. I didn't bring it up with her right away. Partly because I genuinely didn't know what I wanted to do with that information yet, and partly because she was still calling and texting nonstop, and I wasn't ready to hear her voice. The 13 missed calls broke down like this. Diane mostly panicking because Leah got pulled over for a busted taillight on her way to her shift at the pizza place, and the cop ran her insurance and it came back inactive. Leah herself called twice, scared she was about to get a ticket for no coverage, before she figured out what had actually happened. The school called once in the middle of all that about something completely unrelated, a scheduling notice, and it landed at the worst possible time and made the whole pile look even more frantic than it already was. Diane's texts went from confused to furious over about 6 hours, accusing me of trying to humiliate her daughter in front of a police officer, like I'd somehow arranged the traffic stop myself from 20 minutes away. I didn't answer either of them that day. I answered my dad instead, because I always pick up for my dad, and he called that evening from his own number, not Diane's, not anyone relaying a message for her. Leonard told me he should have said something back at the cookout, instead of standing there at the grill with the spatula in his hand, and that as far as he was concerned, I'd done the right thing walking out. But he also said pulling Leah's coverage on a day she was actually driving around for work was a different kind of move, and he wanted to know if I'd thought that part all the way through before I did it. My mom got on the line right after him and was a lot less measured about the whole thing. She said I was being reckless with a teenager's safety just to make a point to her mother, and that wasn't how she raised me. That one landed harder than almost anything Diane had said in the yard, my own mother taking even part of the other side. I told them both the same thing. I told them I hadn't put Leah in any danger I'd created. The taillight was already broken before any of this started. That part wasn't on me. And that all I'd done was stop voluntarily paying for something I was never legally on the hook for in the first place. On a day where nobody was driving anywhere they hadn't already planned to be driving regardless of what I did with a policy. I told them if Diane wanted her daughter covered, she could call her own insurance and put her on it herself. Same as any other parent does. My dad said that was fair enough. My mom didn't say much else, but I could tell from how fast she got off the phone that she wasn't finished being upset about it. 2 days after that, Diane showed up at Carla's house in person. I watched the whole thing from the upstairs window because I wasn't ready to be in the same room as her yet. Carla didn't let her pass the front step, stood right in the doorway with her arms crossed and told her I wasn't ready to talk and she'd pass along a message if anything changed. Diane apparently spent a good 10 minutes trying to talk her way past my own sister on that porch, getting louder by the minute, until Stuart came out from around the side of the house where he'd been doing yard work and asked her to head out before the neighbors started paying attention. She left, but not before saying something to Carla about how this whole thing was being blown out of proportion, and Carla was just taking my side because that's what sisters do. Carla told her that wasn't taking a side, that was just answering a door, and shut it. I finally brought up the Mason transfers myself that same night over text, because I wasn't ready to hear her voice, but I also wasn't going to keep sitting on it. I told her I'd seen the 8 transfers going back to October. I told her $3,000 to her brother, while she was telling me the family couldn't afford new tires that same spring. Felt like its own kind of disappearing act, especially considering the whole weekend had supposedly been about how much of a financial drain I was on the household. She didn't deny any of it. She told me Mason was going to lose the apartment he'd been splitting with a buddy if she didn't help him out, and that she didn't tell me because she already knew exactly what I'd say. I told her she wasn't wrong, that I would have had something to say about it, but that wasn't the same thing as me telling her no, and either way, it wasn't a decision she got to make alone with money that came out of an account with both our names sitting right there on it. She didn't really have an answer for that part. She switched the subject almost immediately, asking instead when I was planning on coming back home, like the conversation about her brother was already wrapped up and settled in her head. I told her I honestly didn't know yet. I told her I needed time to figure out whether I wanted to keep being the guy footing the bill for a house where my own wife stood in front of my parents and agreed out loud that everyone would be better off if I just disappeared, and that as of that point, nobody in that house had walked a single piece of that back. Not her. Not Leah. That's roughly where things sat for the better part of a week. No calls from Leah at all in that stretch, which honestly told me plenty on its own, considering how fast her phone usually went off when she wanted something. Then there was the thing with Diane's mother, which I haven't mentioned yet because it happened almost by accident. Diane's mom, a woman named Tiffany, called Carla directly instead of going through Diane, which Carla found strange right away since the two of them have never been particularly close. Tiffany told Carla she'd heard her own version of events from Diane and wanted to know if it was true that I'd cut Leah off the insurance the same week the family found out Mason had gotten himself another bounce check on rent at the new place he'd moved into, the one Diane had apparently helped cover the deposit on too, on top of everything I'd already found in the account. Carla didn't know anything about a second deposit. Neither did I, not at that point. Carla called me right after she hung up with Tiffany, and that's the first I heard there might be more to the Mason situation than just the 8 transfers I'd already found. Apparently, Diane's mother thought I already knew about the deposit and let it slip, thinking she was just confirming something instead of handing over brand new information. I didn't say anything to Diane about it yet. I wanted to look at the statements again first, further back than I'd originally checked, because if there was a deposit on top of the transfers, that was money I hadn't accounted for at all, and I wanted to know exactly how far back this actually went before I said another word to anybody about it. That Saturday, exactly a week after the cookout, my phone rang again. Not Diane. Not Tiffany. Leah, calling from a number I didn't recognize because by then, her own line had been off for the better part of a week and she was apparently using a friend's phone to reach me. I almost let it go to voicemail out of habit, since I didn't recognize the number, but something about a Saturday afternoon call made me pick it up anyway. What she said on that call, and what I found out afterward going back through the rest of those bank statements, is the part I'll get into next because it changes a lot of what I thought I understood about that whole spring. And it's not the conversation I think most of you are expecting. Final update. Leah called off a friend's phone because hers had been dead for over a week. No apology, straight to the point. Was I the reason her tutoring app got cut too, since it ran off the same card? That's how I found out she'd been paying for it herself with a prepaid card a school counselor named Stephanie helped her set up, trying to fix 2 failing classes before her mother found out how bad it actually was. I told her I appreciated her saying it. I also told her it didn't erase the hot dogs comment, and she didn't have a single word back for that. I went through the joint account again that week, further back than before, because the Mason transfers had me too pissed to settle for half the picture. Carla sat across from me at her table the whole time, getting louder with every line we hit, and that's when we found the trailer. $2,000 financed through some installment app for lawn equipment for a business that never started. I called the store, confirmed it ran through Diane's account email. When I called her about it, she didn't even bother lying. She told me she'd mentioned it to me back in April. I'd said no, and she went around me and did it anyway, and that my no was apparently why she'd started resenting how much control I had over money that was supposed to be ours. I lost it on that call. Told her there's a difference between disagreeing with a no and spending behind my back like I was some landlord she had to sneak past, and I was done pretending those were the same thing. She hung up mid-sentence. I called back, straight to voicemail. So the house notice went out. Only ever had my name on the deed, 5 years of informal trust that meant nothing the second things got hard, so I had my lawyer draft something formal. 60 days, in writing, no more handshake arrangement. He said 60 was generous. I told him I knew, and I didn't care anymore about being generous. It landed the same week as Leah's graduation. I'd RSVP'd back in March before any of this started, and I wasn't letting Diane's stunt at a cookout cost me showing up for a kid who'd finally started being straight with me. So I went. Sat 3 rows back with my parents. Didn't say a word through the whole ceremony. Diane's mother, Tiffany, caught me in the parking lot after, already going off before I had my keys out. How could I serve her daughter eviction paperwork during her own granddaughter's graduation week? Like the timing was the crime, and not 18 months of money I'd covered without a single complaint. I told her it wasn't an eviction, it was a notice, and she could learn the difference or stay mad about a word she didn't understand. She said the whole family had already decided I was the problem, that I'd turned cold, and controlling the second thing stopped going my way. I told her the only thing I'd turned was honest, that I was done pretending $3,000 a Mason and a trailer never happened, and if the family had already picked a villain, they'd done it without asking me one real question first. Diane got to my truck before I could leave. Leah's cap still balled in her fist, yelling that I had no right to humiliate her in front of her own family on her daughter's graduation day. I yelled back that the RSVP came in March, that the lawyer's calendar wasn't my calendar, and she didn't get to act shocked that hiding $3,000 for a year had consequences. She told Leah to get in the car loud enough that 3 other families turned around. Leah just stood there a second before getting in without looking at either of us. I slammed my own door harder than I needed to and drove off still shaking. 4 days later, Mason showed up at my house. My actual front door, no call first, no warning, standing on the porch of a house he knew I'd just put his own sister on notice to leave. He started in before I even got the screen door open. That I'd ruined his sister's life over him, just trying to get back on his feet. That I was a vindictive piece of shit choking out a woman over a brother who hadn't done anything to me directly. I didn't let him pass the threshold. Told him $3,000 and a trailer financed off my account wasn't getting back on his feet. That was theft with extra steps because he ran it through his sister instead of a bank. He tried to push past me into the doorway, and I put my shoulder into the frame and told him if he took one more step, I was calling the police right there in front of him. He stood there another minute yelling that I'd regret this, that the whole family knew exactly who I was now, then turned around and got into a car that was, ironically, still partly insured off money that had run through that same account. Diane sent me a 40-second voicemail that same night, and there wasn't a second of remorse in it. She screamed that I'd pushed her brother to the point of nearly putting a fist through my door, that I was going after her family one at a time on purpose, that I was a cold, calculating son of a bitch who'd been waiting for an excuse to take all of them down. I didn't call back. I sent one text. Every time someone from your family shows up on my porch screaming, that's one more day I get more certain I did the right thing. 2 weeks after that, at the 4th of July thing her side throws every year, the one I'd gone to without thinking twice for 5 straight years, my father-in-law pulled me aside before the food was even out. Told me the family had made up its mind. I wasn't welcome there anymore. My showing up was making things harder on Diane. I told him to ask his own daughter where $3,000 of his family's money actually went before he decided who the villain was. He didn't have anything for that. I left before the fireworks started, and I heard somebody behind me mutter that I always had to make a scene. The 60 days ran out whether anybody liked it or not. I didn't extend it a single day. By August, Diane and Leah were in a 2-bedroom 15 minutes from her job. The deposit covered last minute by the same mother who'd screamed at me in that parking lot about timing instead of the money. Diane stopped talking to me beyond logistics. Leah went dark almost 3 weeks straight because Diane had apparently told her picking sides with me would only make everything worse for everybody. When Leah came back in September, on her own line this time, she still didn't apologize for what she said at the cookout. I didn't make her. What she told me instead was that she'd spent that whole summer watching her mother scramble alone for rent and a deposit for the first time in her life. Money that used to just show up out of nowhere with nobody asking questions, and watching that happen taught her more about what I used to carry than 5 years of me actually saying it out loud ever did. People keep asking me why I let her back into my life at all after everything, like taking her to dinner means I forgave the whole house. I didn't. I want that stated plainly. I didn't forgive Diane. I didn't forgive Mason. I will never forget standing in that yard hearing my own wife agree out loud that everybody would be better off without me. And I told Diane exactly that in the same exchange, where she was screaming about her brother. But Leah was 17, drowning in 2 failing classes. She was too scared to admit to anybody, and she said one ugly sentence in a moment of panic aimed at the nearest person standing still. Diane and Mason spent a year making deliberate choices, lie after lie, transfer after transfer, choosing every single time to keep me in the dark. That's not the same thing as a kid losing her composure once. I drew that line on purpose, and I drew it hard, because blurring it would have meant pretending 5 years of actually raising her counted for nothing. I took her back on my terms, and I told her exactly that the first night we sat down at the diner off the highway where Diane used to get her tires done. No money running through her back to that house. No passing messages. No being used as the wire transfer with a face on it so somebody could milk me again without asking directly. I pay for her own phone line, in her own name, period. If she wants insurance, she works for it or gets her own policy. I'm not walking back into that house, and I told her flat out. I'm never speaking to her mother like a civil human being again, not because I'm holding a grudge for sport, but because Diane never once apologized for the sentence itself. only for the timing of the notice, which isn't the same apology and never will be. Mason still tells people I destroyed his family with one phone call to an insurance agent, leaving out the trailer and the $3,000 entirely. Diane tells her version at every gathering I'm no longer invited to. Tiffany never apologized for the parking lot. My father-in-law hasn't called since he threw me out of his own 4th of July.